What is the force by which Earth pulls on an object that is simply resting on the ground? Gravity. Why can specific functions be regained through training even after they are lost? Because brain circuits are reorganized. Why do stage lights appear in different colors? Because of the mixing of light. When the attractive force between particles is weak, which state is a substance more likely to be in? Gaseous state. What type of rock is formed when magma cools and solidifies without a volcanic eruption? Intrusive igneous rock. What do we call magma erupted by volcanic activity that has solidified at the surface? Volcanic rock. How do oxidation and reduction of a substance always occur? Simultaneously. What do we call a mixture whose properties are uniform throughout? Solution. What is the scale used to represent the acidity of a substance? pH. What is the energy required when a substance changes from one state to another called? Energy of state change. In the periodic table, what do we call the elements located between metals and nonmetals? Metalloids. What is the basic unit in the human lungs where gas exchange occurs? Alveoli. What is the phenomenon in which a plant bends or changes direction to grow toward light, known as phototrophism? Phototrophism. What is the main component of the cell membrane? Phospholipids. Which cells in the blood transport oxygen? Red blood cells. Which organelles in the cell modify and distribute proteins? Golgi apparatus. Which environmental problem is related to glaciers melting and sea level rising? Global warming. What is the first seismic wave to arrive when an earthquake occurs? The P wave. What do we call the places on the ocean floor where new crust is created? Mid-ocean ridges. In which direction does heat always flow? From a higher temperature to a lower temperature. What are the three states of matter? Solid, liquid, and gas. What generates Earth's magnetic field? Convection currents in the outer core. In the principle of the lever, what is the relationship between mechanical advantage and force on the loss in distance? They are inversely proportional. Which experiment allows us to observe an interference pattern of light? Young's double-slit experiment. With what is the phenomenon of magnetic resonance associated? The resonance of particles in a magnetic field. What did Foucault's pendulum experiment demonstrate? Earth's rotation. What kind of harmful light does the ozone layer in the atmosphere mainly block? Ultraviolet rays. Which type of seismic wave cannot travel through Earth's interior? S waves. In which latitude belt do the prevailing westerlies mainly blow? The mid-latitudes. What do you call a material that does not conduct electricity at all? An insulator. What does inertia mean? The tendency of an object to maintain its state of motion. What characteristic does visible light have among electromagnetic waves? It is light that can be seen by the human eye. In waves, what do you call the number of oscillations that occur in 1 second? Frequency. At the boundary between which media does the refraction of light occur the most strongly? Between air and water. Which scientist discovered electromagnetic induction? Faraday. What is the difference between uniform linear motion and uniformly accelerated motion? Whether or not the velocity changes. How does the speed of an object in uniform circular motion behave? It remains constant. Which law explains the relationship between work and energy? The work-energy theorem. Which physical quantity is conserved when two objects collide? Momentum. When a gas changes into a liquid, what energy is released? Thermal energy. What is a representative example of a liquid changing into a gas? The evaporation of water. Why does a rubber balloon stick to a wall after you rub it on a door? Static electricity. What essential core technology allows a drone to plan its route and travel to its destination without pilot intervention? GPS and autonomous flight. To which organ system does the brain belong? The nervous system. What does AI stand for? Artificial intelligence. What is the most important organ for breathing? The lungs. What does heart rate mean? The number of heartbeats per minute. When current flows through a coil, what kind of magnet does it behave like? A bar magnet. What property does not change even when the state of a substance changes? The mass of the substance. What is the unit of life activity formed when multiple organs work together? An organ system. When a volcano erupts, what material can be released? Volcanic ash. What is the process called in which one type of rock changes into another? The rock cycle. What is the junction between one neuron and another called? A synapse. Which sensor helps a robot maintain balance? Gyro sensor. From what kind of matter can radiation be emitted? Unstable atomic nuclei. Why are emotions and memories stored together? Because of neural connections in the brain. As emotions are better regulated, which ability improves? Social interaction. By what force are galaxies in a cluster bound together? Gravity. What happens to an object as air resistance increases? It falls more slowly. In what way is an electromagnet different from a permanent magnet? Its magnetic strength can be adjusted. How is magnetic force related to the strength of the electric current? It is proportional to the current strength. What do we call the point at which a solid changes into a liquid? Melting point. Which two organ systems are involved in the process of receiving a stimulus and producing a response? The nervous system and the muscular system. Why can AI assist in medical diagnosis? Because it can perform precise analysis. By what method does a water purifier make water clean? Filtration and UV sterilization. Why can a smartwatch measure heart rate? Because it uses a light sensor. What structure helps the brain respond quickly to stimuli? Neural networks. What do we call a nerve that contains both sensory and motor nerve fibers? A mixed nerve. Why are the stars in a globular cluster so close to one another? Because gravity acts strongly. In the three primary colors of light, what color appears when red and blue are combined? Magenta. What is the name of the large blood vessel that blood first passes through when it leaves the heart? The aorta. Among vertebrates, which group of animals lives both in water and on land? Amphibians. Which planet has the most clearly observable rings? Saturn. Among the ways bacteria exchange DNA, which one uses a virus as a vector? Transduction. Which part of the human brain mainly processes bodily sensations such as temperature and pain? The parietal lobe. What is the abbreviation for the chemical oxygen demand used as an indicator of water pollution? COD. What are the tiny sacs in the lungs where gas exchange takes place called? Alveoli. What is the name of the liquid metal with the element symbol Hg? Mercury. What is the reactor component that absorbs neutrons to control nuclear fission called? Control rod. What is the largest animal on Earth? The blue whale. In vertebrates, what is the organ that fish use for respiration? Gills. What is the rock called that forms when lava erupted by volcanic activity cools and solidifies? Igneous rock. What do we call the distance an object travels in a given amount of time? Speed. What is the name of the hot and humid air mass that affects summers in our country? The North Pacific air mass. What do we call the distance an object travels per unit time? Speed. What is the force that tries to return a spring to its original state after it has been stretched or compressed? Elastic force. What is the relationship called in an ecosystem in which organisms eat and are eaten by one another? Food chain. What do you call a chemical reaction whose enthalpy change is negative? An exothermic reaction. Why can landforms suddenly change when a volcano erupts? Because of lava and erupted materials. What is the force by which electrons and protons attract each other called? Electric force. If a galaxy appears blue in color, what does this indicate? That it contains many young stars. What law describes the relationship between the volume and pressure of a gas at constant temperature? Boyle's law. When a typhoon forms, the sea surface temperature must be at least how many degrees Celsius? About 27 degrees Celsius. What is the phenomenon called when a star ends its life and explodes? A supernova explosion. What is the approximate tilt angle of Earth's axis of rotation? About 23.5 degrees. What do we call animals whose body temperature remains relatively constant? Homeothermic animals. What do we call the large, dark, flat regions on the surface of the Moon? Maria, lunar seas. Which gas is one of the main causes of Earth's climate change? Carbon dioxide. What is the largest planet in the solar system? Jupiter. What do you call the mountain ranges on the ocean floor? Mid-ocean ridges. What do you call rocks that are formed by volcanic activity? Igneous rocks. Which planet in the solar system has the highest surface temperature? Venus. What do you call the region between Mars and Jupiter where many small planets are concentrated? The asteroid belt. What do you call a climate with low precipitation and large temperature differences? Desert climate. What kind of city is a smart city? A data-driven city. By what method does a humidifier make the air moist? By producing water vapor. Why does a light bulb emit light when it is turned on? Because electric current produces light. Why can fever occur after vaccination? Because an immune response is taking place. When you pour hot water into a plastic bottle, close the cap, and let it cool, the bottle becomes dented. Which concept is related to this phenomenon? Air pressure. In a beverage that tastes refreshing and produces bubbles, which gas is dissolved in the largest amount? Carbon dioxide. When purifying tap water, which substance is added to kill bacteria? Chlorine. When magnesium is placed in dilute hydrochloric acid, which gas is produced? Hydrogen. What state change occurs at the temperature where ice turns into water? Melting. Which pigment change is related to the leaves turning color in autumn? Breakdown of chlorophyll. Which change is related to wet paper becoming wrinkled as it dries? Contraction. Which separation method is used when boiling seawater to obtain salt? Evaporation. What is the phenomenon called when vinegar and baking soda are mixed and the mixture swells up? Gas generation. What is the wind that blows from the sea toward the land called? Sea breeze. What is the central region of a typhoon called? The eye of the typhoon. What is the changing appearance of the moon called? The phases of the moon. Which phase of the moon is not visible from Earth? New moon. Which planet is the smallest in the solar system? Mercury. Which substance makes the surface of Mars appear red? Iron. 3. Oxide. What is the approximate length, in days, of the Moon's orbital period around Earth? About 29 days. Which gas is most abundant among those released during a volcanic eruption? Water vapor. What is the main cause of earthquakes? Plate tectonic movement. Where is the source of Earth's magnetic field located? In the outer core. What is the outermost layer of the Sun called? Corona. In which layer of the atmosphere is the ozone layer found? The stratosphere. During which lunar phase does the Moon appear the brightest? Full moon. What is the flow of hot gases and rock fragments ejected during a volcanic eruption called? Pyroclastic flow. The dark regions on the Moon called lunar maria are made of what? Basalt. What is the property of an object that returns to its original shape after a force is applied and then removed? Elasticity. What is the phenomenon called when light bounces off a mirror? Reflection. What do we call the region around a magnet where magnetic force acts? Magnetic field. What is the phenomenon called when sound travels around the back of an obstacle? Diffraction. What do we call a material that does not conduct electricity? Insulator. What is the sum of all the forces acting on an object called? Net force. What is the phenomenon called when a sound wave meets an obstacle and is reflected back? Reflection. What do we call a material that conducts electricity well? Conductor. What is the relationship between unlike poles of a magnet? Attraction. What is the relationship between like poles of a magnet? Repulsion. In an electric circuit, what is the device that blocks the flow of current called? Switch in the off position. What is the mineral called that has the property of attracting iron? Magnite. When sound is transmitted through air, how does the state of the air change? Compression and rarefaction. If a compass is placed near an electric wire, what happens to the needle? It rotates. What is the electricity produced when a balloon is rubbed called? Static electricity. What is it called when atoms form bonds by sharing electrons? Covalent bonding. What is the type of bonding in which atoms transfer electrons when they combine? Ionic bonding. What do we call the positively charged central part of an atom? The atomic nucleus. What do we call the change of state when a substance goes from a liquid to a gas? Vaporization. Into how many main parts is the body of an insect divided? Into 3 parts. In photosynthesis, which gas is produced? Oxygen. In plants, which organ absorbs water? The roots. Which cells in the blood are responsible for immunity? White blood cells. Which cell organelle is the site of photosynthesis? The chloroplast. Which organ secretes the largest amount of digestive enzymes? The pancreas. What is the main mechanism by which water moves upward from the roots in plants? Transpiration. What is the protein in human blood that transports oxygen? Hemoglobin. What is the force that opposes the motion of an object? Frictional force. How do letters appear when reflected in a mirror? They appear reversed left to right. What is the outermost layer of Earth's atmosphere called? The exosphere. What happens when light travels from water into air? It bends outward. What is the shape of Earth's orbit? An ellipse. What happens if a feather and a steel ball are dropped at the same time in a vacuum? They land at the same time. What are the bubbles that form when water boils? Water vapor. In what directions do sound waves travel? In all directions. Which planet was the first to be discovered using a telescope? Uranus. What is the red liquid inside a thermometer? Alcohol with added dye. What are the openings in a plant leaf where gas exchange occurs called? Stomata. What is the process of transferring pollen to the pistil called? Pollination. Which two gases are mainly exchanged in the alveoli? Oxygen and carbon dioxide. What is the tissue that connects bone to muscle called? Tendon. What is the main organ that regulates the amount of water in the body? The kidneys. What is the tissue in plant stems that transports water called? Xylem. Which cells are needed for blood clotting? Platelets. What is the tissue that transports nutrients produced by plants called? Phloem. What is the hardest natural material on Earth? Diamond. What is the largest planet in the solar system? Jupiter. What is the structure of DNA called? A double helix. How many chromosomes does a human cell have in total? 46. Which planet in the solar system has the weakest surface gravity? Mercury. What do we call the respiration that plants carry out at night? Cellular respiration. What reaction is the opposite of nuclear fission? Nuclear fusion. What is the rusting of iron called in chemistry? Oxidation. Who discovered the rule that in DNA-based sequences of pairs with T and C pairs with G? Chargaff. What stage of a star is much larger and brighter than the Sun? A giant or supergiant. After a star has used up its hydrogen, which element does it fuse next? Helium. By what other name is Newton's first law known? The law of inertia. Which organ in the human body secretes insulin? The pancreas. What are the three common states of matter that all substances can have? Solid, liquid, and gas. Which plant did Mendel use in his experiments? The pea plant. How does the image of an object appear in a convex mirror? A small, upright virtual image. What is the phenomenon called when a meteor emits light while passing through the atmosphere? A meteor. What is the enzyme that digests starch? Amylase. What is the longest river on Earth? The Nile River. What is the largest island on Earth? Greenland. In an oxidation reaction, what do we call the side that loses electrons? The reducing agent. What is the mitochondrion commonly called? The powerhouse of the cell. Among animals, which is the largest? The blue whale. Thanks for watching all the way through. Share your science knowledge in the comments. Your support helps us create even more science quizzes. See you in the next one.